They never told you about her. Not in the history books, not in school, not in the stories passed down through generations. But she lived, and she bore the weight of a world that barely noticed her name. In the early chill of colonial America, under roofs that leaked and laws that silenced, she rose before the sun, not because she wanted to, but because survival had no patience. This is not the story of a queen, nor a heroine, nor a rebel. This is the story of a poor woman in 1750, one of thousands who shaped a nation from the shadows. The cold bit through the wooden walls like teeth. Morning, if you could call it that, arrived not with light, but with the moans of her feverish child. There was no fire left, no warmth, only the sound of coughing and the air so cold it burned her nose when she breathed. She wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her chest and stepped onto the wooden floor, barefoot. Her toes were numb. But this was just another morning. She crouched by the hearth. The ashes from yesterday's fire were cold and gray. With trembling fingers, she placed a few scraps of dry grass, rubbed flint against stone, once, twice, until a spark took hold. A flame flickered. A faint warmth whispered back into the room. This fire wasn't just for heat. It was for the porridge, for the child, for hope. There was no time to pray. This was survival, and survival did not wait. She stirred the pot slowly. The porridge was thin, almost gray. No milk, no butter, just yesterday's oats and water. She spooned it carefully to the child's lips. He was pale, sweaty. His cough shook his tiny frame. She whispered softly, "Eat, my love. Just a little." 2 of her babies had died before their second birthdays. This one might be next. But she did not cry. Not now. Not in the cold. There was no room for tears, only silence and endurance. She walked a 1/4 mile to the stream, empty buckets swinging from each shoulder. The path was frozen stiff, brittle weeds scraping her skirt as she passed. Her breath left her lips in clouds. Her fingers, raw from cold, gripped the wood until they ached. Reaching the stream, she broke a thin layer of ice with a stick. The water stung her wrists as she filled both buckets. They were heavy now, pressing against her knees as she made her way back uphill. In the cabin, she poured them into a basin and knelt down to scrub. There was no soap, only ashes, lye, and her tired hands. Her husband's shirt, stiff with old sweat. Her only apron, patched so many times it was more stitching than cloth. No one thanked her. No one noticed. When her own chores were done, she walked across the frozen fields to the landowner's farm. Inside the barn, it smelled of animals and wax. She cleaned used candle molds, scraped hardened feathers from goosenecks, and pressed clumps of curdled milk into rough cheesecloth. The lady of the house passed by once, said nothing. Each hour earned her a copper cent, sometimes 2. It was barely enough for salt. If she saved, maybe a lump of soap by the month's end. Her hands cracked, the skin split open in winter, but she wiped them clean on her skirt and kept working. Because if she didn't, her children wouldn't eat. The fire had burned low. Outside, the wind howled between the trees, but inside, she sat close to the hearth, needle in hand. She stitched tiny pants for the baby, using cloth from an old grain sack. She patched her apron again, the same spot she had mended last month. Her back hurt, her fingers bled from the needle's prick, but still, she sewed, because morning would come again, and clothes don't fix themselves. Her child shifted in sleep beside her. The fire cracked softly. No one saw this moment, but it mattered. This was how women survived. She had no last name, at least not one the court would honor. Her birth was never registered, her marriage never recorded. Her children carried her blood, but not her name. She could not vote, could not own land, could not speak in court, unless her husband allowed it. The laws weren't made for her. They were written around her, and they forgot her the moment they were signed. When her neighbor stole from her garden, she couldn't report it. When a man struck her in the street, there was no one to listen. The sheriff heard only the voices of husbands, landowners, and men with names. She was none of these, so she stayed quiet, bit her tongue, and learned that in this world, survival meant silence, not justice. The child stopped breathing just after dawn. No doctor came, no priest knocked. She wrapped the tiny body in the old linen she had saved for her own burial. With shaking hands, she dug through frozen dirt. The grave was shallow. The ground was cruel. She carved a name into a scrap of wood. One word, no date, no ceremony, just a candle, just her breath, just snow, and silence. The next day, she rose with the dark. The world did not stop. No one asked, no one came. She gathered wood, fed the fire, stirred the pot. The same motions, the same silence. Her grief had no place in this life. It had to be folded, like laundry, and put away. She watched the last child sleep beside the fire. Every breath was a miracle now. She counted them in silence and whispered into the dark, "I won't lose you too." The promise wasn't to God. It was to herself, because losing one was unbearable, but losing more was the end. She had lived through 3 wars, buried 2 sons, and still, she shelled beans by the fire each evening, because no one else could. Her hands shook, her back ached, but her work did not end. She was not honored, she was not remembered, but she kept feeding those who could still live. Her husband had marched south. She didn't know if he was alive, or just another name carved into a tree. But potatoes still needed planting, and mouths still needed feeding. With a baby on her back and a toddler tugging at her skirt, she worked the dirt, hour after hour. Every seed was a prayer, every breath a battle. She never chose this land. She was stolen to it. They gave her no name, only chains, no home, only commands. But she sang, low, in the dark, where no one could hear, except the other forgotten. Her voice became a thread, binding them all, reminding them that even in chains, they were human. They had no statues, no ballads, no pages in the history books, but they had each other. In the quiet moments, they shared bread, stories, and scars. No medals, no parades, just women, carrying the world on backs no one bothered to name. Their names faded, their lives blurred, their stories were never carved in stone, but they lived, they endured, they mattered. They are history, the kind no one tells. Until now, their stories were almost lost. But you're still here, which means their voices still echo. If this moved you, help us carry their memory further. Subscribe,
More stories
share,
they
keep
tried
their
to
history
erase.
alive.